Hello, hello, all. Happy Thursday. I thought we would do a quick live today, and we're going to talk. If anybody's got any questions for me, because you know me, I missed Monday, right? Just sharing the page out, just sharing it out. Hello, hello. Today we're going to talk about finding your familiar. Okay, a lot of people are familiar with the concept of a familiar, but they're not really comfortable in how do I find it, how do I know that it's my familiar, and what can a familiar actually do for me. So we're going to talk about that today. So if you have questions before I start, let me know. As always, excuse the stuff in the background, right? Hello, hello. Just 2 minutes and I'm going to start talking about finding your familiar. How do you find your familiar? How do you know that it truly is your familiar? What can a familiar do for you when it comes to magical working? We're going to kind of go over that kind of stuff. Share the video out if you'd like, and I am going to start talking about familiars in just a minute. Thanks everybody for joining. So today I want to talk about, hopefully y'all can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up that you can hear and see me okay. I'm hoping that you can. I am going to talk about finding your familiar today. What it is, how to find it, what it can do for you, what it can't do for you, all those kind of things. Familiar, the word familiar has such a wide range of definitions depending on the witch. Here go my animals in the background, sorry. Depending on the witch, right? So I'm going to go over, again, this is my dealing with old ways witchcraft and growing up and the lineage of what is a familiar, what can it do for you? Is the cat that I have now my familiar, kind of thing. So there are, hopefully I don't freeze up, hopefully you can hear and see me. So there are a whole different interpretations, right? Like I said, of what a familiar actually is. So it's important to distinguish between them so that you know what I'm talking about, really. So the modern interpretation of a familiar is one of a physical animal, right? It's a creature that's demonstrated that helps the witch in some way or another. This interpretation, however, is pretty new, and it likely comes from the representations that you get from witches having control over animals and cats and such in movies and books and TV shows and stuff like that. So that's where that definition of familiar came from. That is not what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm talking about old ways witchcraft, like we always do, right? So instead, I'm going to be discussing the traditional interpretation of the concept of the familiar as an animal spirit that works with the witch in every way possible. Familiars are immensely helpful beings to the savvy witch and can provide companionship, magical learning, personal growth for an entire lifetime. Okay? What a familiar is not. A familiar is not your pet. In most circumstances, 9 times out of 10, 11 times out of 10, it is not your pet. It's not even a physical being, okay? There are exceptions to the rule, of course, and spirits can occasionally possess physical beings, as we know, but this is typically to the detriment of the animal being possessed. So you really don't want your pet to be a familiar. I don't recommend pursuing that option just because it can wreak some havoc on the animal or object or plant or whatever you're doing. So a familiar is not a slave that you can manipulate and control. These beings are very real and they have free will of their own. You have to make sure that you respect their decisions, their actions, be polite, treat them as your equal because they actually are. A familiar is not a toy. Again, these are thinking and feeling beings. Sorry about my animals in the back. They are thinking and feeling beings. And if you wish to work with one, if you want to work with your familiar, it has to be a mutual benefit. So you have to be very careful to give that respect in order to get respect, right? That's kind of how it goes. So what is a familiar really? And I'm going this way because I've got my thing over here with the scrolling going on. So sorry about that. So what a familiar really is. This is where it can get a little bit tricky in discussion, okay? A familiar is not a spirit that you might meet wandering in a graveyard or traipsing through the astral planes. Those everyday spirits, they have no real connection to you at all. Much like any person, any stranger that you'd meet, on the street. Your familiar, however, is what's known as your soul couple or your soul double, okay? Completely different from like a twin flame, soul mate kind of thing, completely different. This is a soul double, and this is a totally different concept for a lot of people, and especially people that are unfamiliar with old ways witchcraft, okay? Put simply, your soul double is a being that shares your soul. It shares your essence. It shares your spirit. It shares whatever term you decide to use for what it's sharing. And again, this can be something that's hard for people to have that concept about, to think about if you haven't had this in the past, okay? If you think of you yourself as a human being, which I'm pretty sure you are one facet of a greater spiritual being, right? It's impossible for the vastness, for your entire self, for your entire being, to inhabit one physical form, one human form, one human body, right? So only a portion of that spiritual being is able to be awake and aware within this lifetime, okay? Hopefully that makes sense so far. Again, if you think of yourself, your whole greater spiritual self is a whole person, then you, the human, right, would be only, say, one of the hands of your spiritual self, okay? Your human self is still you, right? Undoubtedly, but that's not the whole you. You are much, much more than that. You are, way beyond that. If this is the case, then you, the human, are one of the hands of you, your spiritual self, right? Then your familiar is going to be the other hand of your spirit. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense and hits home for you. Are the right and left hands, are your two hands separate from each other? Yes, they absolutely are. Of course they are. But they're not separate beings, right? Your left hand and your right hand, your two hands on your body, or your 2 feet, or your 2 eyeballs, or whatever, they're both parts of your body, right? So they're both parts of you as a whole. Okay? So that's exactly how a familiar works. You and your familiar are distinct, or familiars are distinct and separate beings in function, but you share a soul, you share an essence. You're both part of the same bigger you. Okay? I hope I'm not going way off of, things for you guys here, but I'll take questions after. So this places familiars into a very unique category, right? They're some of the only beings that you will ever meet that you can be absolutely 100% certain that you can trust wholeheartedly and without any doubts whatsoever, okay? You can trust your familiar. A familiar will always, always, always have your best interest in mind, because in fact it's their own best interest as well, right? Because you're the same, you're a soul double. And likewise, you should always have your familiar's best, well-being in mind, because that of course is your own well-being as well. You are shared. So that concept raises an interesting question, doesn't it? Why does it occur? And why do familiars exist at all then? Right? Why do you need a familiar? If you're talking about it's just a part of your own self, why do you need a familiar? You, the spirit, can you hear somebody cutting the grass? You, the spirit, create familiars in order to assist you as your human form in your earthly journey. Okay? Whatever it is that you're here on earth to do or to learn, your familiar is created to help you to accomplish that goal. In simpler terms, you can think of a familiar as a sort of a spiritual twin, right? You're connected at the very essence, but how you exist, you're completely separate. Okay? Hopefully you guys are still following me here. I know when you get into concepts like this, away from what the neo versions of things are and get into old ways witchcraft, it becomes deeper, it becomes more conscious, it becomes where you go, oh duh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. So if the concept of course sounds strange and it confuses you, or you find yourself questioning the validity of the ideas, just put them aside for now. An in-depth understanding of them is not completely necessary for you to be able to work with them. Whatever concept you have of what your familiar is, or how it works, or where it lives, or whatever, is just fine to be able to still work with them and learn from them and have them work with you, right? I encourage you, of course, to seek your own truth always. One person's way is not the other person's way. I'm just, again, giving you my personal lifetime experience and what I've grown up with in knowledge and things that I've worked with over the 35 plus years. So why, next, let's talk about why you would want to work with a familiar, right? So working with a familiar is an endeavor of personal growth in some way, in one way or another. For some, that means growing kinder, stronger, more self-aware. For others, it means growing more powerful or more knowledgeable in the craft, learning specific skills within the craft, or receiving guidance to help you find those people that will teach you and assist you as you grow and learn. So it's important to remember, though, where familiars are concerned, you are always working with them, right? They are not servitors. They are not slaves. They do not work for you, right? They have their own self. They are their own self, and they're going to do as they please no matter what you say or do, like it or not. So in the end, it's always best to approach working with them with your familiars as a mutual relationship. Mutual respect will enhance the experience that you have with them, and in turn, they're going to help you move forward and teach you what they're here to teach you much easier, okay? Familiars come in so what is a familiar, right? They come in all different shapes, sizes, configurations, species, blah, blah, blah. They come in everything. They can present themselves as animals, insects, fantasy creatures, plants, even people. So how they appear to you can tell you a great deal about yourself as a person, and the kind of growth that you're going to be pursuing with them, okay? You can have more than one familiar. Most witches often have more than one familiar. You don't have to, but it's very common to have more than one familiar. You can have, a lot of different familiars. Most commonly, you're going to see people that have one familiar that they work with a lot, or they have a set of 3 or 4 that are predator, prey, and Karen types of familiars, which we're going to go over in a second. You'll have some that work with them for different skills and abilities that they want to work on. So again, it's how your familiar presents to you and your mutual understanding of what you're going to be working on together, right? So Each type of familiar that I'm going to go over, it usually appears to you when you undergo a particular kind of change in life or a challenge, right? So let's go over the predator, prey, and carrion, like I was just talking about. Okay, so the predator familiar, oftentimes it appears to you when you need to take charge, okay, and go after whatever it is that you want. They often herald, they come to you in a time of high activity, hard work, potential conflict, but instead of being very taxing or trying, or this familiar often signals that you're coming into your own, right? Predators help you to dig deep, find your strength, and pursue the needs, desires, and give you that motivation no matter what it is, okay? A prey familiar, they appear when it's time to learn, to protect, or to love yourself. Those animals or those familiars, because again, your familiar can be anything, they vary quite in a wide scope about what they're going to teach, okay? But whether it's the gentle self-acceptance that, maybe a deer may teach you, or what people would visualize as with a deer, the ability to think on your feet and change directions real quick, right? The animals are about learning, or the familiars. And I keep saying animals because mine personally are animals, but again, they can be anything, right? They're all about learning to make use of and the most of your surroundings, your natural talents, and they base themselves on the nature that's around you. Okay, so I have a lot of prey ones just because I have a scope of I have 7 different familiars that I personally work with, and I call on them for different reasons, okay? And again, we'll go into that a little bit more. The last one is the carrion familiars, and those are the ones that usually are most uncomfortable for people. Those are vultures and hyenas and possums and beetles, and they're not usually very glamorous type of familiars, but we learn from them the most, okay? They are changed, they are self-sacrifice. Sorry, I have never seen that happen on a live video before. An ad came up. So, again, they are not the glamorous familiars, right? The carrion is death and life. And they call on us to kill parts of ourselves, basically. They're kind of like getting the death card when you're reading tarot, right? It's time to let go of something that's no longer serving us. It's time for that change. It's time for us to get over something. That carrion familiar is going to help you to drop that dead weight, release habits and thoughts that no longer serve you, clear the way for better, happier, healthier, habits or life, or, whatever. That's what those are. So keep in mind that not everybody will have those 3 types of familiars that, you work with, but I just want to put out there again, because I think people, again, think familiar and they go with, my cat is my familiar, or this bird I had when I was 12 years old was my familiar, and that's usually not the case, okay? Whatever configuration that you find yourself working with your familiar, it's going to be perfectly suited for you. It's going to provide you with your most personal growth. You may find yourself with a land animal, with a sea animal, with a flying animal, or you may find yourself with a single familiar who has a tendency to shapeshift as well. So they can shapeshift a bit depending on what they're trying to convey to you. All of those things are good familiars to have, right? Remember that your familiar is a way for your spirit to communicate with you more directly. So there's no wrong way for your soul to talk to yourself, right? Or to try and reach out for yourself. Just remember to keep an open mind. Whether you find yourself with a great elephant for a familiar, or a tiny, fruit fly. Learn what they've come to teach you and what they're here for. It's the key to a lot of greater knowledge, to power, to well-being, to happiness. So working with your familiars is an awe-inspiring event when you do, and getting close to them brings yourself and your craft into a whole nother level. Okay, so how do you find your familiar, right? Well, meeting a familiar can happen in a lot of different ways, just like meeting any kind of spirit can happen in a lot of different ways. I'm going to close this window real quick. Hold on. Because I've got my neighbor cutting the lawn and he's going to come right by the window here on his side. But so meeting a familiar, again, can happen in all different ways. Some people meet there spontaneously. Some will find their familiar while astral traveling or while meditating. Some people meet them in dreams. All completely valid ways of meeting your spirit guide, or sorry, not your spirit guide. You can meet your spirit guide in those ways too, but finding your familiar. If you're comfortable with a certain particular kind of spirit or out of body work or body work, that's most likely going to be the easiest for you to work with your own familiar. So if you're familiar with meditation, you can use meditation. If you're familiar with astral travel, you can use astral travel. Visualization, however you normally kind of work. The only thing that is absolutely necessary for you in order to meet your familiar is to hold the intention that you would like to welcome them into your life. Okay? And again, this kind of crosses over with spirit guides too, but we're talking familiars today. So that, remember, is not an open invitation. You don't want to leave an open invitation to any wandering spirit, right? You don't want to attract just, like I said, wanderings, masquerading around as your familiar. Remember, your familiar is a soul double. It's a soul copy. It's whatever you want to call it, but it's an extension of you. So you're going to hold that intention to meet your soul double. Okay? When your familiar comes to you, you will immediately recognize it. There is going to be a connection that you just know immediately. There's absolute trust. It's like meeting your best friend after, a lot of years apart. It's just an immediately drawing. You just know it's right? So that's about all I can say for that. Listen to your gut though, because if something feels wrong, it very well may be that it's not truly your familiar that you're interacting with. So you can do a guided meditation. If you, again, prefer to try astral travel to meet your familiar, I have an astral travel for beginners class that's in the academy that you can go through and meet that way. But let's talk about a meditation for you, okay? So you may need to do a meditation several times before you meet even one of your familiars one, okay? Don't give up. Just make sure that you continue to ask for and open yourself up for your soul double, for your familiar that you're entering, that you're asking them to enter your life. Visualization, of course, is a main key in meditation. So if you find that, hard or unpleasant, that's okay. You can meditate any way and any concept that feels good for you to be able to do it, however you normally do your visualization, okay? So you would, of course, in your meditation, you're going to sit comfortably, you're going to get comfortable, you're going to get yourself into that relaxed state, right? I usually use the 4-4-4 or 4-3-2. You're going to breathe in, hold your breath, and breathe out. And you're going to do it in a pretty steady way. So if you're going to do 4-4-4, you would breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 4, right? You're going to do this a couple times. Never be and hold your breath. It should be just a regular inhale, exhale. So when you feel that you're ready, you're going to set the intention that you're going to meet your familiar. Once you stated your intention, either to yourself or out loud or silently, begin to visualize yourself in nature, because all of your familiars are going to be nature-based. Okay. Let that image come to you naturally. If you find yourself on the beach, then be at the beach. If you find yourself in a forest, let yourself be in a forest. If you find yourself in the desert, wherever it is, just let yourself be there, and let it come to you naturally. Try not to judge the environment that you're in, because sometimes we go into it with a preconceived notion of what our familiar should be, right? And oftentimes that's not what our familiar ends up being, or the one that presents to us that time ends up being. Don't judge anything that comes to you. Trust that you're going to end up exactly where you need to be. So once you're rooted in that environment, you're going to explore it, right? You're going to, walk through, look around, whatever you need to do. Your familiar may present itself to you very quickly, and it may not even present itself at all this time. Keep in mind that familiars come in all shapes and sizes. So it may be an animal, a person, a plant, or something else entirely. Again, it could be a fantasy creature. So don't discount something that jumps out at you just because it doesn't fit the idea of what you think a familiar should look like, okay? When you find your familiar or what you think may be your familiar, introduce yourself. Again, be polite. Ask it if it indeed is your familiar. Again, most of the time you're going to know because there's an instant yes, kind of thing. But sometimes it's a little bit more hesitant and we go in with preconceived notions, so we have to get past those. Watch the reaction to this being's, or watch your own reaction to this being's response. Does it feel true to you? If it does, then that's great. If you have a gut reaction, is it of no, this isn't right? Is it because, again, of that preconceived notion of what a familiar should be? Or is it because, it's truly not your familiar? It may be a vulture, a wasp, a hippo, an elephant, a dandelion, whatever. Whatever familiar comes to you as is, it's using that form for a specific reason at that time, okay? So that's another concept to kind of keep in mind. Try to remove any expectations that you have because it's only going to slow down your process of actually meeting your familiar, just because it's not your preferred animal, right? Like my favorite animal is an otter, but none of my familiars are otters, okay? It's just, that's my favorite animal, okay? So after you've met your familiar, it may have things to tell you or show you. So if it wants to take you somewhere, you want to follow it. It's likely going to be a very defining moment where the lessons that familiar is in your life to teach you or to help you expand is going to be shown for you. If it's not your familiar and they don't take you anywhere, bid it farewell, thank you, and just kind of bring your focus back to your own body. Focus again on your breath when you're coming out of meditations, right? Open your eyes, stretch, try it again. After completing the meditation, you're going to want to write down everything because things change in the mind. You forget things, so write it when you come out, anytime you're doing meditation, okay? So that's a meditation way of finding it. Again, you can find your familiar in dream work and astral travel, however you normally would interact on a spiritual platform. So ways to approach your familiar work. So what can you do with a familiar? Familiar work can take on many, many different forms. And how you go about communicating and learning from your familiar, it'll be as individual to you as your witchcraft practice is, right? So some of the most common ways that you're going to work with a familiar are through journaling, astral travel if you do that, dream work, but there can be more advanced methods as well, such as shape-shifting, that can be employed as you progress down your craft. Keep in mind, when I say shape-shifting, keep in mind that there is no way for you to change your physical form in any way. It happens in the spiritual realm, okay? Just got to put that out there. So there's, again, a lot of different ways to approach learning with your familiar. As I've said, they have their own ideas. They have their own way of thinking about how things are going to go, but they're frequently going to work within your personal preferences when you ask them to, right? In the end, there's really two main ways to proceed in your familiar work. One is going to be giving up control. And that is exactly what it sounds like I just said. You become open to whatever your familiar seeks to teach you. You follow its guidings, its teachings, its suggestion, its understanding that these lessons that are driving it and you in this mutual kind of thing are driving you to expand yourself, your personal and spiritual growth, in exactly the way that your soul needs to. Because again, as you are doing this, right, it's a mutual thing because you're the right hand and they're the left hand. So it's expansive for both. You can request, the second way is requesting help with a specific problem, issue, or circumstance. So that puts you in a position of more control, right? you never control your familiar. They don't work for you, but it puts you in a position of more control. So you request your familiar's help with a specific areas of growth that you're working in. If your familiar thinks, because it does have a mind of its own, so if your familiar thinks that you're actually working against yourself, it may refuse to help, okay? Or that you're moving in the wrong direction, or, you know, if it's just kind of stalling with helping you and things like that, it may just be a matter of trying to work in a direction that your familiar knows is not for your highest good, right? It's not for your best benefit. You may find down the road, if you just ignore it, you're going to find down the road that you should have listened to your familiar and kind of, you know, but anyway, I digress. So it is a very personal matter, though, on how you work with your familiar. I, again, speak from my own experience and what I've heard from other people and my sisters and my lineage, you know, kind of thing, of relationships with familiars. But you have to experience yourself, because everybody's experience is going to be different. You can, of course, combine those two different methods. Giving your familiar control until you find something in particular that you wish to work on is probably my favorite way. And it works quite well with a few of my familiars. My third familiar I have coming up is adamant about having control, but it only shows up when it has something very specific to teach me. So you can, again, journal with your familiar. Writing is really, really impactful in the magical realm and the spiritual realm, right? Because words have power. You can journal, and it sounds silly, and people in the beginning feel silly doing it. If you take a piece of paper and you write down a specific question, you say, you know, Dear George, if your familiar's name is George, Dear George, what guidance do I need to receive most today? After making that request, you just simply kind of wait. And then words, or they may come immediately, words will start coming to you, and you just write them down. Whether they make sense or not, you just write them down. You're going to analyze them later. Right now, you're just receiving, okay? You can also do storytelling instead. So you can ask a question and then start writing. You know, if you're good at creative writing, you can start writing, you know, a story, and your answer is most likely going to be found within that story when you go back and reread it when you're done with your session, okay? Meditation, of course, is an excellent way to contact and work with your familiar. How you experience, again, that meditation technique is completely up to you, but that is a wonderful way to do it. Astral travel is an amazing way as well. If you're not familiar with astral travel, there's an absolute beginner's course in the academy that I believe is going up this afternoon, actually. So that's one. You can also use dream work with your familiar. And the issue with that is not everybody remembers their dreams, has the ability to remember their dreams. So if you're one where you do not remember your dreams, of course, dream work is not going to work for you, right? Or dream journaling is not going to work for you, so you need to find an alternate method. So whatever you find is the path to work with your familiar is what's best for you, okay? You can have your familiar help you in your magical workings. This is one of my favorite ways to work with my familiars, or 3 out of them. Again, some will be there specifically to teach you things. Others will be there to help you, because it's just as much fun for them as it is for you. So when I spell work and I do my magic, I call upon familiars, and they take those, because again, they're on spiritual realm, right? They take those energies I'm sending and work with them on that realm to be able to get them into universal flow. So what if you do your meditation or in your dream or whatever, and you find your familiar is, you know, a dung beetle, and you don't like that? What do? Well, you basically just have to deal with it, because if you know that this is your familiar, then they're taking that form to be able to teach you, you know, whatever it is. Very serious. You just have to deal with it. You don't want to just ignore that familiar. You don't want to go, oh, I'm not working with that one because it's ugly or whatever. You need to, again, show that respect in being that it is its own being that is a part of you, here to teach you and guide you, right? So you just have to deal with whatever comes across. If your familiar, again, refuses to show up regardless of what you do, it does happen sometimes. Don't panic. Everybody has a familiar, at least one. There can be several different causes for it, and one may be that you're trying to contact it or connect with it through the wrong means. So you want to try an alternate, different way to do it, okay? Let your instincts and your feelings and your gut take control. Another reason is that, again, they just simply feel it's not the right time. So if you're trying to open your spiritual self, but your physical life is in shambles, you're going to need to direct your focus into your physical life. Yes, you're going to bring spirituality into it to help you along the way, but that's not, your familiar is not there to fix your life for you, right? So it may be that your familiar is saying, nope, not time for me to come in yet. You need to, clean up that mess first before we work together, okay? So also, if you're on your travels and you feel that one familiar showed up, but you feel like you have a whole, more of them, like there's got to be more. I know there's more out there. Like, how do I get a hold of them? You basically just have to wait it out, because again, they're going to present themselves when the time is right for them and their workings and what they're supposed to be teaching you and showing you. So if you have multiple familiars, they're going to show up at different times, but they're going to show up at the absolute perfect time for you, right? If you have a familiar and you think, again, that they're lying about being your familiar, what do you do at that point? Command it to reveal its true nature. And I say this to my witches all the time, to my students all the time. You are a witch. You are a being who lives in both the physical and the spiritual world. This makes you incredibly powerful, okay? Your commands hold weight in the situations and circumstances. A properly cast magical command will remove any glamour that's being used to trick you, okay? If need be, banish the being, and the next time you go to meet your familiar, cast a protective, circle that's only going to allow your familiar to contact you. Be selective, or let the energy be selective to ensure that your space is protected from any being that would try and trick you. But again, any spirit in the physical world has no power, no control over you unless you give it to them, okay? You live in both the physical and the spiritual. That's like kibosh on anything else, okay? So again, you can have, the last thing I'm going to talk about before I take any questions, if there are any, you can have a familiar help you with your spell work, carry messages, and do other magical workings. This to me is one of the most fun and the ways that most people utilize their familiars, right? So whether or not it's going to help you in such matters is completely up to you and your negotiations with your familiar on whether or not that's going to happen. Again, like I said, you cannot force your familiar to do anything. It may refuse to help you in matters that it finds petty, okay? If it does disagree with you on such things, there's nothing you can do about it. You can try and pull in a different familiar if you have more than one, but they can lend you, a familiar that's working with you in your magical workings and in your spell work, they can lend you energy, they can teach you spells, they can visit other witches, and spirits to carry messages and serve as shape-shifting companions if you do shape-shifting work, allowing you to see through their eyes, okay? So remote viewing through them as well. Many of those techniques take a lot of time, or take some time at least, to experience and learn. And it's important first, the main thing with your familiars is to understand that it's not your pet. You may have a deep connection to your pet, and you may have had a previous life connection to your pet, but your pet is not going to be your familiar. You can establish trust. The trust is already going to be there, but you as a human always have that, can I trust this, kind of thing. So you have to learn that your familiar is absolutely 100% for your higher good, will never do anything to harm or put you in harm's way. And will actually a lot of times help you when somebody's sending negativity and ill wishes and things like that towards you. So you have to respect their boundaries, heed their advice, and you have to work with them often, because that is the easiest and the best way to learn their own personalities and what their lessons are for you. So that is what I have on familiars, and I know that probably is not what you guys are used to hearing about familiars. Again, can a familiar be called to work with another person is one of the questions that I received. Can a conjurer send a familiar over to work with you? And here's the thing is, again, your familiar, your personal familiar is a soul double. So nobody can call that forward for you, okay? Other people may be able to see, may be able to step in and see those familiars, even though you can't, but it's very rare. They're only going to present to you because only you know the connection. But can a conjurer, can I say, we at one point at Annika's offered familiars. Can you do that? Yes. These are what I call wandering familiars. Those are ones that have been conjured, are thought forms, are servitors. Completely different than familiars, right? But the term familiar is used because it's most widely accepted and known and understood, right, in mainstream. So again, your personal familiar, your soul double is only going to be available to you. You can bring a familiar into your life, home space that is created from astral, level, a wandering familiar, a wandering spirit that wants to help you in a specific subject, or, maybe they're really good on dealing with money energies. So you're going to create them. There's a fine line between what is a familiar and what is a servitor. Again, they're not interchangeable. Your familiar is never, never, never working for you, always working with you in conjunction. So there's that. So yes, you can bring something in what you would consider a familiar, but it's really more of a servitor or a thought form that is working for you to help you. It's not working with you. That's the difference. So hopefully I totally confused everybody. But that is the information that I have on familiars. Again, if you're looking at going deeper into it, we're going to go deeper into it in the academy. And also the astral travel for beginners will be in the academy as well. So make sure you check those out. So with that, thanks for joining me on this live. I'm going to pop off of this live and go on to a different one so that we can do some Kipper card readings. I'll see you there. Have a wonderfully magical rest of your day.